It's the real news. I'm Ben Norton. After 6 decades of conflict, it looks like the war on the Korean Peninsula may finally be coming to an end. Since the early 1950s, South and North Korea have technically been at war with each other. From 1950 to 1953, the United States waged a devastating war on North Korea, in which the US killed some 3 million people, 20% of the nation's population. The US burnt most of the country's major cities to the ground. After this US led war, South and North Korea never signed a peace treaty, which means generations of Koreans on both sides of the demilitarized zone have grown up in a perpetual state of war. Well, now that all appears to be changing, South Korean officials confirmed this week that they are in talks with North Korean officials and are considering drafting a peace treaty for the first time. Joining us to discuss this historic development is Simone Chun. Simone has taught at Northeastern University and served as an associate in research at Harvard University's Korea Institute. She is an active member of the Korea Peace Network and is on the steering committee of the Alliance of Scholars Concerned About Korea. Thanks for joining us, Simone.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, can you just react to this historic news? I think a lot of people don't understand how important this is, that after 6 decades of what is technically still a war, an ongoing war, it looks like there may finally be a possibility of a peace treaty.
Of course, this is truly historic and exciting moment. And I was born and I was raised, and I got my education until going to graduate school in Korea. And I'm part of the generation in Korea who was born in a divided Korea. I've never known Korea that was unified, and so this is a truly historic moment, and responding to the news that is about the possibility of two Koreas making political declaration that ending the Korean War, and this is truly a moment that we have been waiting. Nevertheless, I must point out that the real major issue is the relation between United States and North Korea still, because the reason why that there has been no peace treaty has been the United States sort of has a position to this major making permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula. So what two Korea is trying to do is right now is to remove that barriers, that hindrance, and having the very first sort of a step toward the peace treaty. That means that they're going to have a political declaration that says, although South Korea was not part of the armistice signed in 1953, as you recall, the armistice was signed between among North Korea, China, and the United States. So in order for the real peace treaty to be signed, those signatories of peace treaty should come to agreement. Signatories of armistice should come to table and make a final declaration to end the war. But in order for that to happen, both Korea have now made an initiative to make a step-by-step approach. First, political declaration of the two Koreas ending the enmity, and the second step will most likely be either three-way or four-way political declaration among United States and two Koreas and possibly China, and eventually leading to peace treaty. And what that means is that finally we will have basically the three pillars of a permanent peace regime. Obviously, if it's successful, for political diplomatic normalization between two Koreas, and also most importantly, United States and North Korea, United States having embassy in Pyongyang possibly. And the second will be that really normalization process, interaction, engagement in all level, economic, social, political, cultural level between two Koreas and North Korea with the other rest of the world. And thirdly, we also wanted to address, one of the second another very important barriers, that is lifting economic sanctions, the harshest, the most oppressive UN-led and US-led economic sanctions against the people in North Korea that are really preventing North Korea to develop its economy and also causing all kinds of humanitarian consequences. And in a nutshell, this is a truly amazing development, and I think that obviously Donald Trump said that he's absolutely getting credit, which is true. And also, I think that another most important point we have to remember is that President Moon Jae-in, who was elected from the after the very powerful democratic movement called the Candlelight Movement, he has taken a very strong initiative and diplomacy, and also with as you recall, the very successful Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. And of course, importantly, North Korea's Kim Jong-un's leadership, unlike the way that Western media portrays a crazy or madman image, Kim Jong-un has been quite, especially since this beginning of this year, has been quite methodical and deliberate, and has been very, very proactive in making the commitment toward peace. So I think that if all goes well, we'll truly, this is probably the year that many of us will remember for the rest of life. It is truly the moment of history making.
Well, we all hope so. It would be a great historic development. And of course, it would be great for peace, not just for people in the Korean Peninsula, but for the world. You raised a few different points there, and I want to address a few of them. First, I think, as you mentioned, a lot of Americans aren't aware of the fact that there are still tens of thousands, more than 26,000 U.S. troops in South Korea. North Korea says that, in fact, the South is militarily occupied by the U.S. Of course, you also mentioned the extremely brutal sanctions that have been imposed on North Korea. Of course, we've seen the effects of similar sanctions on Iraq in the 1990s, in which hundreds of thousands of children died because of those U.S.-led UN sanctions. So clearly, civilians often suffer because of this political pressure through sanctions. So I'm curious, you did say that Trump has been claiming credit, and maybe he does deserve some credit, but I think you raise a more important point. I'm skeptical of the idea that Trump actually bears responsibility. What a lot of people in the US media are ignoring is that, as you mentioned, there was a massive grassroots movement in South Korea, not just a peace movement, but there was a movement that brought in a more liberal government under President Moon. And this is one of the first governments in decades that has actually been committed to rapprochement and peace on the peninsula. So can you talk a bit more about the protests, the grassroots movement, and how it led to a more left-wing government that was actually open to this possibility of peace in the South?
Indeed, we had an amazing candlelight protest, as you recall, for almost a year, almost every Saturday, there was hundreds of thousands of Korean people who tried to, contest the corrupt and very ultra-right-wing Park Geun-hye government, and that required almost 1 out of 4 Koreans participated in the Candlelight Revolution. And even for that Candlelight Revolution, as you remember, also activists in both in South Korea and also United States had formed a solidarity, and which elected now with the President Moon Jae-in. And the President Moon Jae-in was actually, he served in the previous liberal government, that is the President Roh Moo-hyun, and he was chief of staff. And also President Moon Jae-in was actually the architect of the second stage of the Sunshine Policy known as the North and South engagement policy, before these 2 consecutive right-wing government, Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye government. And so, which would, I think, as I pointed out earlier, without real massive support, mobilization, not only for peace and democracy, I really don't think that we would be at this moment here in the history. And I think that also North Korea has also, Kim Jong-un, has been also obviously, paying attention to the immense popular movement in Korea, and it empowers people. And in the past, what you have especially with the North and South Korean relationship, it was all about, the negotiations between the elite. And as you recall, the upcoming April 27th summit is a third summit. But previous two summit was more sort of at little level. But this time I am really arguing that this moment is fundamentally different from previous one, in that this time we have an enormous energy and a passion and mobilization and solidarity from people, not only in Korea, from elsewhere, to demand that we're going to make a permanent peace regime and peace system on the Korean Peninsula. So in a way, this movement is particularly very different from other one, where in the past, even inter-Korean agreement was signed, it will quickly be abandoned, as say, depending on who become president. As you recall, that even 2000, the first inter-Korean agreement was signed, but then they quickly abandoned as George Bush came in and says an axis of evil, North Korea's axis of evil. Even the second inter-Korean agreement, 2007, was also abandoned after George Bush, at the end of George Bush's administration, and Obama came in and says the strategic patience policy, which basically created really didn't produce any result. So as I said, that this time, because of the massive popular movement and democracy movement, we're going to have a more opportunity and possibility to really cement this rare opportunity given. But nevertheless, there are, we have to be realistic. There's a concrete structural constraints. The infrastructure of U.S. full spectrum dominance in Northeast Asia still remains. As you know, South Korea does not have wartime control of its force. United States has the wartime control of South Korea's military. United States has the military bases, all over South Korea, and those will be the biggest really constraint. And moreover, U.S. there's very infrastructure, military industrial complex that really also hinders peace. So I think that especially because of these obstacles, really we have to the more power has to be from below. And one more thing I would say is that with regard to the Trump getting credit, I think that there is some skepticism about Trump giving Trump all credit, but I think that here is sort of a strategic political interest he has. I think it should be we should fully exploit.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time here, Simone, but thanks for providing that perspective. Frequently in the Western media, we don't hear about the grassroots activists and the people on the ground in South and North Korea, and then also here, as you mentioned, in the diaspora, who have been organizing for peace. Of course, while Trump and Pence were threatening nuclear apocalypse and fire and fury on North Korea, it was the activists on the ground in South Korea who were pushing for peace talks. And it looks like we actually may see a peace treaty for the first time. So thanks so much for providing your insights, Simone.
Thank you.
Reporting for The Real News, I'm Ben Norton.